In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I use the new Marvelous Molds Tufted Simpress on one of the tiers of this masquerade ball cake that I made. I love these Simpresses. They're very cool, and this one worked in very well into my design. So you can see it here. I am mixing in a little Tylos into my fondant, and that just helps stiffen it up a little bit on me so that it's a little bit easier to work with when getting it onto my cake. So just a little bit mixing in, and I'm going to just knead it well into my fondant. Okay, now I'm going to roll out one long, big piece of this fondant. And the reason I want to do one long piece is because I want to try to roll out as much as I'll need to cover my entire cake. I'm covering a small 6-inch cake here. And I the main idea here is to get each panel that you add to the cake the same thickness. You can use a pasta roller, run your fondant through that, or a sheeter to get it the same thickness throughout, but I'm a little bit lazy and I don't really feel like doing that. So instead, I am just going to try and roll out one piece as even as possible throughout. And then I'm just getting out the air bubbles with my acupuncture needle, and I'm just kind of swiping my roller over top to get it nice and smooth, and making sure that I'm going to have enough. I'm going to need about 3 panels for this cake with maybe a little bit extra to fill in the gap at the end. And I have enough for that. So I cut off one piece to work with and move the other to the side. Now I've got my powdered sugar, and I'm adding that to my Simpress, covering the whole thing and then just kind of tapping it out of the Simpress. And now I'm going to add my piece of fondant into it. Now the trick here is to make sure that you push down and push well onto the entire Simpress. Push that fondant in there so that you can pick up all the impression that Simpress has on there. You want as much detail as possible, and if you don't push down throughout the whole thing and push down well, you might not get as much detail on it as you should. So make sure you do that. Then I'm using my rolling pin to roll over the edges of the Simpress, and that will kind of cut it out for you. So here I'm rolling over the ends, and then instead of rolling over this top, you can actually go side to side. That actually helps and works well too. And that will cut it out for you. When I attach it to my cake, I am going to use shortening. You could use water, but I like shortening because I can move it around if I need to. There's just a room for error when I'm using shortening. When you're using water, it's just a little bit more like stuck where you put it. You kind of it's like a one-shot deal. So I like to use shortening when I can. And if I get any shortening on the green part of the Simpress, and I just kind of rub it off. But I'm making sure to get shortening covering the entire fondant piece. So this will obviously be the back of the panel. And then I'm going to line it up with the bottom of my cake. In this instance, you don't have to do this. You could raise it to the top, but my cake is about 5 inches high and the Simpress is about 4 inches high. And I actually ended up creating a bow that looked like it was tied around the top to fill in the gap. So that worked well for me to line the Simpress up with the bottom of my cake. And I'm just going to gently press it on once it's lined up. And because we had the powdered sugar in there, it should come off pretty easily. I'm going to gently push it on. You can fix the top line with some sugar shapers if you have them, just to get it nice and even, to make sure it's nice and even. I'm just rubbing off some of the powdered sugar here. At the end, I actually use some confectioner's glaze and go over all of the panels, and that really gives it a very cool look. It looks like patent leather. gets rid of all that powdered sugar for me as well. So that's always an option. Okay, so the second panel, same thing, and now I'm going to line it up as snug as I can to the end of the first panel. If you don't get it snug enough, that's okay, because I'm using shortening, I can kind of scooch it a little bit to nudge it up to the end of the first panel where they meet. To get them to look seamless, you really are going to want to work a little bit at that seam to get it to line up. But I was very impressed with how well I could get it to look seamless in the end. So I'm just kind of pushing it in a little bit and kind of stretching it out a tiny bit. I don't want to ruin the design, but I do want to butt that up as close as possible. And you can still see the seam here, mostly because of the powdered sugar. Once I go over this entire thing, get rid of that powdered sugar with my confectioner's glaze, it really looks pretty seamless, and you have to kind of search for those seams. And so again, I was very impressed with how you were able to line them up well. Okay, so for this last little bit, I needed to fill in the gap here. So I rolled out another panel piece. I held it up to my cake to see about where I would need to cut. I actually used my little fabric ruler as well to measure it out. And then basically you want to cut the pattern out so that it will line up on both ends. One end naturally will because of the way that this impress creates it to line up, but that other end you're going to have to cut out. So you just want to make sure that you get it right. It's better probably to have it a little bit short rather than shoved in there, right? A little bit. If it's not wide enough, that's okay as long as it's close, because you can stretch it out a little bit to get it to fit together snugly. But if you cut it and it's a little bit too wide, you're going to have a little bit a harder time kind of shoving it in there. So keep that in mind as you go as well. So here I am just measuring that gap so I can get an idea of how wide it needs to be. Take my panel out, I measure on there, and then I start to cut, but I get a little bit nervous that I don't have it just right, so I hold it back up to the cake just to make sure I'm cutting in the right spot. And then I start cutting out that pattern. And then you have to decide whether or not you need to leave the little beads in your pattern when you're cutting. You'll see what I mean in a minute here. I'm cutting out the pattern. And then I then realize that I actually don't need the little beads on the end of the pattern there, because they are up on the cake already, so that when I fit this into that little section, they'll already be there. So I go back over and cut out those little beads right here so that my pattern fits nicely together. Then I add my shortening on the back and I place it in. And then you can just use your fingers once you get it on there to just kind of stretch the ends so that they butt up nicely together like you did before. And you can really get a nice seamless finish. Once I added my confectioner's glaze to the entire thing, so you can still see the seams here, but that's because of the powdered sugar on the surface. You could use a steamer, you could just use a little bit of water, shortening to get the powdered sugar off, or you can use confectioner's glaze. I wanted the patent leather look, so I'm just brushing some of my confectioner's glaze over top. All the way around. That gave it a really cool look, and you can see that seam blends right in and you can barely see it if you don't know where to look. And then I actually ended up painting those dots gold, excuse me, to give it an even cooler look. And it really, you can see the gold dots there, it really just gave my cake a very cool finish. Really love the Simpresses, really recommend them, and they're pretty easy to use. If you want to see the whole tutorial of how I made this masquerade ball cake, you can come check out cakeheads.com, and I'll see you later.